Hey everyone, it's Hamish from the Young Investors Podcast. Myself and Brandon are excited to bring you your weekly rundown of the latest business and investing news from around the world. Now, a quick reminder before we get into the podcast is that nothing in this podcast should be taken on as personal financial advice. If you're ever unsure about your finances or investing, make sure you reach out to a qualified financial advisor. But with that said, let's get into another episode of the Young Investors Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to yet another episode of the Young Investors Podcast. Hamish Hodder, how you going, mate?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
You're doing fantastic. You're doing fantastic. I'm doing well, but you're doing fantastic because you're getting a free pass today, mate. You're getting an absolute free pass on this podcast.
Yeah, I've been demoted to the bench.
Demoted to the bench, and the reason that he said that we're saying that is because for this podcast, I actually got a chance to sit down with Richard Coffin from the Plain Bagel yesterday, actually, and we had a really good chat. He released a video about the issues that surround the Finfluencer world, finance influencers online, and his video is amazing. It's 27 minutes. Definitely recommend you go watch it over on his channel, which is the Plain Bagel. But it really sparked an interesting I guess there's more to talk about here in Australia with all the stuff that we've been through. So it was really interesting getting him on. I'm going to make a video about it, but I thought that what I would do with his interview is just leave it completely unedited and run our chat, which goes for about 40 minutes, just as an additional podcast episode. So that's what we're going to be doing today. It was great that we were able to get him on. So Hamish, I think I'm going to stop waffling. That's pretty much all of the setup. So for the next 40 minutes, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my chat with Richard Coffin from the Plain Bagel. Well, everybody, welcome back. And today I would like to introduce a very special guest. We have had him on the podcast before, and he's also been on the channel before. He is, of course, Richard Coffin of the Plain Bagel. Welcome, Richard. How you going?
Good. How are you doing, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm going pretty well. How's things over in Canada at the moment?
Good. We we had snow last week, and this week it's 20 degrees Celsius, so super sunny. It's wild.
Warming up for you, right? Warming up.
Yeah.
What's your summer kind of temperature range where you are?
It gets up to like 35 would be a hot kind of 3 times a year sort of temperature we reach. But it's usually that kind of 25 to 30 range is what you'll typically see on like a typical summer day.
Well, it's getting cold here, so I'm coming to where you are, mate.
Nice. Yeah, it's like for a very brief period of time, though. So
yeah,
you got to get in and get out.
Yeah, I'll get in during your summer, and then I'll definitely leave during your winter.
Yeah. There you go. That's right.
But yeah, so guys, we've got Richard on today because I don't know, maybe some of you guys have already seen it, but I think it's a couple of weeks ago now. Richard released a really, really insightful video, backing his video up with data, of course, on the topic of finfluencers, finance influencers. Everyone's got an opinion on finance influencers. They're good, they're bad, they're great, they're ugly. So in this video or in this podcast, I really just wanted to go into a bit more depth with Richard because it's a very interesting topic. We've definitely seen the rise of the finfluencer over the last, really the last 5 years. I'd say probably it was one of the consequences of the pandemic, stimulus, lockdowns. Do you reckon that's fair? Sure. Definitely over the last kind of 8 years, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's kind of funny where I think a lot of, I'm sure to your channel's growth as well and my own, like I think a lot of that was, or at least I noticed, was tied to the events around the stock market around that time. Things like like you mentioned, the stimulus checks and this surge of retail investor activity, the GameStop rally, all the fallout from there. And I think that really pushed a lot of finance from more of a niche topic, which it is still to an extent more niche than other topics, but it's become a lot more of a mainstream hobby for a lot of people. And I would agree. I would say kind of 7 years, but definitely the last 5 years, we've seen a lot more activity in that area.
And I guess we're going to, in this podcast, talk about kind of both the pros and the cons of finfluencers. But I find honestly, I find the fact that Finfluencers exist to be kind of crazy, because this is going to be really interesting talking to you, because you actually professionally work in the field of portfolio management, investment analysis, and I guess I never like calling us Finfluencers. I like the term like finance content creators, but I guess most people would just lump us in with Finfluencers. Yeah. So I'm interested in your opinion. Like, why do you think this has happened? We already have so many people that are qualified to help people manage their money, like yourself in your day job. Why do you think so many people actually are tuning into this online content instead of deciding to go down the professional pathway?
I think a lot of it has to do with the accessibility and the, quite frankly, bad PR of the typical finance industry, or what I'll call like traditional finance. Right. You know, like, I don't have to tell you the reputation of Wall Street is perhaps not the best in the world. And ever since like even the 2008 financial crisis, the area hasn't really recovered or seen its reputation rejuvenated or repaired from the lows it reached during 2008. And I think that, to call it stigma for lack of a better word, but that's really stuck around for all sort of finance related positions. And, you know, even in my own role, like I'm actually working on a video right now, but when it comes to even registered advisors, there are even issues that you run into there where, for example, some bank branches have some poor records when it comes to customer service and the recommendations they give, where they'd rather put a client into a high fee mutual fund that doesn't necessarily perform to the best of the client's interests than a more appropriate investment. So I think to one extent, you have that side of it where some players have really spoiled the party for the rest of the industry. You know, I like to pride myself in the work I do, and the way I'm registered means there's that fiduciary duty to clients. So there is that degree of professionalism there, but you're still going to get lumped in with the worst practices of the industry. So that's one aspect, is I think a lot of people have a distrust of the industry, and that ranges all sorts of positions on the finance side. And then on the other side, you know, if influencers have come as a sort of, as an answer to that issue where, you know, well, if we can't quote unquote trust advisors or registered professionals or people with this expertise, well, we're going to do our own thing. And so people start posting online. And I think one thing which we'll get to is that a lot of people do so from a sort of humble or honest beginning where they do have an interest in genuinely sharing information. The problem comes when that information isn't fully informed or when you have these conflicts of interest that arise. So it's kind of a dual-pronged issue where the industry has some issues that it has a lot of work to do to resolve. And I think we've made some progress over time, but the PR is still one of the biggest issues there, the PR of the finance industry. And on the other side, you have these Finfluencers coming with accessible content in that there's typically no cost for accessing YouTube videos or TikToks. It can be accessed anytime. You know, you can go on your phone and watch videos whenever you want, whether it be 2 a.m. or 12 in the afternoon. It's often entertaining, which compares to a meeting with your financial advisor, probably not the most fun you'll have in the week. And these people are also relatable and tend to come across as honest. So you have those sort of endearing qualities of a lot of these Finfluencers. It leads a lot of people to go that route, at least first, before going down the professional route at times.
And just to extend what you're talking about there, it kind of blows my mind, not necessarily that Finfluencers exist, but that Finfluencers actually do have the amount of influence they do. I don't know. I feel like people should be more skeptical, even of like I've got no malicious intent, and neither do you. But I feel like some people, even they just go along, they should be a little bit more skeptical. I feel like when I'm watching finance content, I definitely listen to what people have to say, but I'm always trying to think in the back of my mind and make up my own decisions. And I'm sure you're the same. Why do you think people are genuinely influenced by what Finfluencers have to say?
Yeah, I think there would be two or three sort of points to that. The first one, we always hear the term parasocial relationship, but I do think that plays a role. So for those unfamiliar, that refers to the one-sided relationship that Finfluencers build with their audience, where obviously the Finfluencer has this audience where they don't really know any of the members personally. They don't really know who their viewers are, but the viewers are very intimately aware and feel like they have this connection with the Finfluencer. So that relationship can cause a sort of bond of trust with the viewer to the Finfluencer, even though very clearly that bond doesn't really exist. The Finfluencer has no idea who this person is. So I think that's one aspect of it, where a lot of the time watching Finfluencer content feels like you're talking to your friend who knows a lot about finance. You might be an everyday Joe who wants to learn about ETFs or stocks or bonds or whatever. And so you turn to your friend who knows about the concept and you trust them to an extent because, well, they know a bit more than you. And like I mentioned, you have this relationship with them, even though in reality, that relationship doesn't really exist, or at least not to the degree that people might perceive it. So I think that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect is likely the education side. I'm not sure what it would be like in Australia, but certainly here in Canada, there's a big gap with education as well in the United States, where personal finances just isn't really covered or done the justice that needs to be done in the schooling system. So a lot of people only really learn about investing once they start making money and they hear that they should start investing. So it's a very late process. And because of that, because these people don't have a base level understanding, you sort of have to trust people, whether they be professionals or someone online, who say they know more than you or that you perceive as knowing more than you. So I think those are two factors where, you yourself and you're well read. So when you listen to content, it's easier for you to pick it apart and evaluate it and, take the parts that you like or that you find valuable and dissect out the parts you don't have an interest in. It's a lot harder for someone who doesn't have that or isn't as well read or doesn't have that education when it comes to personal finances and investing. So a lot of the time there's this gap that has to be filled with trust to an extent.
Yeah, interesting. And obviously, I guess if you do end up being influenced by an influencer, that can be a good thing if you get good advice.
Of course, yeah.
And I guess it can also, obviously, the other end of the spectrum, it can be a bad thing if the advice is speculative or risky or malicious. So I'm interested in, you'll want to give a nuanced answer, I know, but I'm interested. do you think the consumer is in a better place generally with or without Finfluencers?
Yeah, it's a tough question to make the total call on things. I would say the positives I think are very strong, and it's hard to say with confidence that the positives outweigh the negatives, because there is some really harmful stuff out there. But I do think it tries its best. And
right.
At the end of the day, more information is going to be helpful. There are issues with misinformation, with that missing nuance around a lot of stuff. But one of the key points of the report is I think it was a quarter of Gen Z survey respondents indicated that they started investing primarily because of Finfluencers. So the only reason they got started was because of coming across this content online. So obviously that's a tremendous benefit. If you ignore for a second how they invest, which could play a role there, obviously, if you just focus on the practice of investing, starting earlier, by all accounts is one of the best things you can do. So there is certainly benefit to that. And a lot of people do focus on generally well accepted practices or generally agreed upon good practices, things like diversification, warning about the risks of stock picking, things like that, which are all great things. So it's not like every Finfluencer is sharing negative information or harmful information. There are people out there who share solid information that does help their audience. The harmful side of the space comes when the content that's being discussed isn't backed by the expertise, and when you have these conflicts of interest that come up. So I think those are the downsides of it. And that's when, it's not to say that everyone who stock picks online is, who shares their stock picks is necessarily malicious, but that is a space where you see a lot of this stuff happen where You have conflicts of interest. Someone who, say, sells a Discord trade signal group or something like that. That's a conflict of interest. And having conflicts of interest, you'll never get rid of every conflict of interest that exists, but you have to be aware of them and you have to mitigate them. Or else you end up with what we've seen, which is a lot of these issues, even to the point where you have blatant scams at times on through some of these influencer pages.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about next, actually, is your kind of viewpoint around financial incentives for influencers, because I think this is where the problems start to arise. And particularly, as you mentioned, when we start getting into the realm of conflicts of interest, I'm wondering, because you've done, even for your most recent video, quite a bit of research for that, like data-driven research to kind of formulate your video and your ideas and opinions. So in your research and also your experience, what are some of the common situations you see conflicts of interest occurring in this type of content?
Yeah, so I think the most common one you see is just playing the algorithm, and that's a very understandable conflict. At the end of the day, you can't harp on someone trying to get views on their channel from being a bit clickbaity or whatever. Like, I understand that to an extent, that's the name of the game, and it's very hard for a video to get traction without playing into that to a degree. I think it's an issue of moderation, though, where you have some people who might say these are the top 5 investments to hold, and then give a more nuanced opinion in the video. On the extreme end, you'll have people who use clickbait to say, this position is going to make you rich, or this position is going to 10x in the next 2 weeks, or whatever. And that conflict exists because it's that content that typically gets views. What would the typical viewer rather watch? A video that says this investment is going to make you a bunch of money very quickly, or here is my risk reward analysis or deep dive into a given publicly traded stock. One clearly has more value or is a more nuanced and expert opinion. But when it comes to social media, like, people aren't necessarily looking for that, or their primal brain is going to be more drawn to the sensationalism of the first video. So I think that's one of the main ones is the playing the algorithm and both in terms of the clickbait of the thumbnail and the title, which I think is more common, but even with the content itself, some people really lean into that and lean into their overconfidence on certain positions. Yes, this position is going to shoot up, whether they believe that or not. That's still playing into the algorithm. There's also conflicts that come, or a bigger conflict, I guess, in terms of its severity or acute nature, I guess, is when it comes to certain promotions. So, one thing that was covered in the video is we've even seen, I'm sure it's more common on the cryptocurrency side, but we've even seen some influencers take sponsorships to cover certain stocks in a positive manner, which is very clearly a conflict of interest. When someone's watching you for objective information, but you're paid to give a positive review, it's kind of a funny parallel, but I like to think of it as like the makeup industry. My wife used to follow a bunch of makeup YouTubers, and there was always this balance being done between, being an objective reviewer and then doing brand deals and launching your own collaborations and stuff. And it's very easy to see when someone had crossed the line as you would just see their reputation fall apart. And I think you see to an extent the same thing with finance, but it's not as well recognized, especially when one of the highlights of the report is that a lot of the time those promotions aren't fully or even to an extent disclosed to the audience properly. There's even been instances of full-on hidden marketing where someone reviews a stock, takes payment for reviewing that position, and then doesn't disclose that to the audience, which obviously is going to cause some problems.
Yeah, that one's a shocker.
That's legal too, first, to be clear.
Yes. Yeah, we have, I guess, reasonable. I mean, YouTube does its best to make sure you disclose when you are getting some sort of compensation. And of course, I'm not sure, is it just the FTC in general make you disclose very clearly if something's an ad? But there, obviously, like anything, there's 99% of people which are doing the right thing, and then there's 1% of people which are doing the bad thing, and they tend to be the ones that ruin it for everybody. But with that said, there's no doubt that there are problems. There's definitely problems. And people, the reason that scams are still around and these things still exist is because they still work. So I'm interested to hear your opinion on what do you think? What do you think's the solution? Is there a solution? And if there is, how do you think the rules need to change to better protect those that consume finance content online?
So it's definitely not an easy solution because, tackling misinformation in finance and investing is just as difficult as tackling misinformation in any other area. And there's always that debate of censorship versus freedom of speech, right? To an extent, there's benefits to allowing the free exchange of information. Well, there's clear benefits to allowing the exchange of free information. But there's also some downsides to it. So it becomes a question of how do you tackle those downsides without going the route of censorship and things like that. And I think there's a few aspects to consider. I think one is to require more disclosure and to have more enforcement around disclosures. I won't necessarily harp on someone for having investment promotion in their video, so long as it's very clearly indicated. And one thing in the report, for example, is that some people will have disclosures, but they're very generic, where, for example, some creators will have multiple brokerage affiliate links, which, nothing inherently wrong if it's a registered business, if they stand behind the service and all this stuff. But then the disclosure will be some of these are paid links, or some of the links included are paid. So there's not that clear disclosure. And I think one way to protect people is to give more information on the disclosure side. That doesn't just include promotions. That includes someone's level of expertise, their qualifications, their experience, and things like that. Because there's nothing wrong with someone going online and saying, here's my amateur stock analysis of so-and-so. Like especially with students, actually, I've reached out to I've spoken with university students before. And that's something I always recommend is try your hand at research and analysis. And if you really want to, you could even try posting it online to get feedback and things like that. But you have to be very clear about the fact that it's amateur research. The issue becomes when you post that amateur research and you say, here's why X stock is going to triple in value, and exuding that overconfidence for the sake of trying to get traction on that post. So disclosure is the one bit, and it comes with disclosing details. Whether you're registered or not is also an important one. And quite frankly, this is something even on my end that I've always avoided putting this information. I shouldn't say avoided, but I haven't been the best at putting this information myself, just because I didn't think it was necessary to an extent. But I've come to realize with doing this research that it's harder to differentiate between, my content and someone else's content. And while, it might, so to an extent, like it's even something that I'm trying to work better on is disclosing my own details. Obviously I have their registration and stuff, but that's not inherently mentioned in some videos. So I'm going to be working on that myself. So another aspect of it is, I think, cracking down on when things cross that investment advice line. And this is something that's tricky because the definition is so different between countries. And I think as you'll dive into, I think in Australia, they've really cracked down, possibly more than most other countries, on the financial advice that can be provided online now. But in the United States, there's a lot of precedent for kind of being able to say whatever you want. Now, mind you, I'm in Canada, and it's a bit grayer in Canada when it comes to the advice you can post. But in the US, there's this precedent sent by this old case involving a stock newsletter, where this newsletter was, I don't know if they were sued or charged, but they were accused of giving unregistered financial advice because they were a paid for newsletter that distributed stock picks. And the case eventually fell in the newsletter's favor, where they said, no, this is protected because it's not personalized financial advice, and they're not getting paid specifically for giving personalized financial advice. So in the US, that kind of, takes all the red tape away and lets you say, not legal advice. I want to be very clear. I'm not a lawyer. This is my own interpretation of what I've seen.
Good disclaimer.
Yeah, exactly. But from what I've understood, that's why you haven't seen a big crackdown on financial advice in the US. There is a crackdown on certain misrepresentations, but not inherently someone going online saying everyone should buy this stock or sell this ETF or whatever it is. You can kind of, there's been this precedent, and what we've seen in the US is most people can say whatever they want, so long as it's not saying, Joe, my subscriber, Joe, whoever, you should do this with your money, which is where it kind of crosses that line. So I think cracking down and better clarifying what counts as legal financial advice and what's like free for people to cover is important as well. And part of that, I think, is part of the report actually suggested reaching out to Finfluencers and having this sort of education campaign on the creator side to let people know when they're crossing the line and to clarify that. Because really, I'm sure, well, I wouldn't know in Australia actually, but at least here in Canada, like I've had to seek out legal advice myself to figure out where the line lies. There's never been any effort to, there's no easy document or resource that lays out what the rules are that's coming from authority. So I think that would play an important role as well. So there's a few things to do, but you can see they're not really trying to censor information. What they're doing is it's bringing more information, relevant details as kind of a disclaimer or disclosure with the videos being posted, and cracking down on the point where that advice is illegal and better clarifying when it is illegal and what that line is. So we like to put the onus on Finfluencers, and that's owed to a degree. There is also an onus on regulators to an extent.
Yeah. And to take that one step further, do you think, I guess, another player, there's the Finfluencer, there's the regulator, there's also the social platforms themselves. Now, when we upload our YouTube videos, YouTube does a pretty good job of saying, hey, tick this box if you're getting paid to say something in this video. And that's kind of a part of the regulatory guidelines. But they're very good at implementing and making it easy for creators to disclose, at least on YouTube. Do you think that the social platforms could be doing more? Do you think that they have a bigger role to play in helping to protect the people that are watching videos on their own platforms?
I think so, to an extent. I think obviously platforms, they all say that they moderate their content based on their terms of service. And I think, there's always this blanket sort of liability point about saying creators acknowledge or agree that they'll post only legal things or something along those lines. And the platforms can say, well, job well done. We did our part. And then they kind of leave it to the creators to self-regulate, which obviously is not going to happen to the extent needed. So I definitely think there's some strategies. I know that this is the CFA Institute report that I'm referencing, but I know in their report, they had mentioned that some platforms like TikTok would add banners to certain finance content. And I think even on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken, like when it comes to medical advice, which I always like to compare medical and financial advice because there's a lot of parallels. Not only financial health and medical health and the importance of that, but in terms of registration and things like that, where, someone can share medical information without being a doctor. But once you start giving advice and things like that, you have to be a lot more careful. And I think when it comes to certain doctors on YouTube, I think there's a banner that will disclose whether or not they're a doctor and will give resources about evaluating medical advice. So I think that's important as well, because again, it's not to, a big part of this is never to, none of this is to gatekeep who can post about finance, because I think you don't have to be a registered advisor. And in fact, it would be quite terrible if only financial advisors could share information about investing in finance, because you have a very biased view. There's no way around that. I think there's a lot of value to people who aren't financial advisors posting about finance and investing. But it's always when that threshold is crossed to giving the advice, and when there's misinformation involved and things like that, that issues start to arise. So again, more information to the viewer with banners. But, I think at the end of the day too, like it's like the Charlie Munger quote, the late Charlie Munger's quote of show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. The best way to tackle this is to reduce the incentive of the clickbait stuff, or whether it be to crack down on that sort of stuff. Because at the end of the day, like I'm sure you would agree that it's not very valuable content at the end of the day, and it's not very helpful. And it does often cross the line of financial advice, perhaps not legally in the United States, but by many other accounts. And I think it's in the platform's interest to crack down on that stuff. But, the finance segment has one of the highest CPMs out of many topics. So you incentivize creators to go into this space and try to make it big because the money's behind it, because there's a lot of revenue behind doing that approach of giving stock picks and things like that. And, I always use stock picks as an example. It's not to say someone can't give stock picks. It's again, when it crosses that threshold of overconfidence, not talking about the risks, which I think is a big one. And again, like effectively, if it feels like a get rich quick scheme, like that's that's kind of the content I'm trying to touch on. So I think those are ways the social media platforms can help, but it's hard to know whether they would willingly go down that route themselves. Whether a site like YouTube or TikTok would willingly say, you know what, no more clickbait on finance or investing, or you can't say that this stock is going to 5x because that's not what you're claiming in your video or whatever. Not only in terms of the effort to moderate that, but just the incentive isn't really there.
It seems like I think we'd probably both be in agreement that there's a fair, it kind of at the moment, I think the creator could do a better job. It kind of comes back to creators needing to do a little bit better. And this is what I find so interesting, specifically talking to you, is because you have both sides of the equation. You are, in one sense, you are registered and you are a portfolio manager, and you can give to your clients, you can give that personalized advice. But then when we turn to being online, we're very careful that, you know, we do give balanced approaches, that we don't drift into the world of personal advice. So I'm just wondering, and you do a great job at being kind of, with all of your content is always extremely well balanced. You talk about the positives and the negatives. It's great stuff. So I'm wondering, do you have your own standards and your own rules that you apply to how you present content, how you work with companies? If you have rules around what companies you do decide to work with, or ways that you manage conflicts of interest yourself, is there stuff that you do in the background to make sure that you keep your content as good as it can be for the end consumer?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, to answer your question, yes, there are different processes. And to be clear, as much as I would love to say that it's entirely out of the goodness of my heart that I hold this high standard, to a degree, part of it is because I am registered as a portfolio manager. So there's that degree where something like a stock promotion video where I would accept money to promote a given stock. Well, I can't do that if I'm a registered portfolio manager. So, to an extent, some of the policies are legal in nature, where I would love to think that if I wasn't in this position, I would still have that level of integrity. But some of it is the name of the game. You know, I wouldn't be able to post videos and keep my registration if I were to go down that route. But definitely some of the rules as a result of that include not working with any financial service platforms. I'm not inherently against that idea for a lot of creators. You know, I think if for example, to throw something out there, if you use a brokerage platform and if you like the brokerage platform and you think it's a good product and you decide, you know what, I like this and I'd like to have an affiliate link for this service, I don't inherently see something wrong with that. So long as you're clear about the risks of investing and things like that, and you don't oversell it. But that's something that for my own channel, I haven't done is work with any financial products or services. And to an extent, I think it has helped the brand. I think it helps, especially, with the fallout of FTX and things like that. It really brought a lot of flack to the space. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is really trying to not cover individual stocks as best as possible. I will focus on news stories at times where if there's a big headline about a position, like Silicon Valley Bank, for example, was a publicly traded stock when it was collapsing. So it's hard not to discuss this important financial event without breaking down the fundamentals of Silicon Valley Bank. So I do make exceptions to that. But generally speaking, the goal is not to provide an opinion on the concept. It's more to provide further information. And I've been called a bear on certain investments at times. When I post a video, I call them party pooper videos, and I talk about the risks of given investments. But the intent of those videos has always never been to suggest a sell or make a recommendation. It's to bring information that I'm not seeing circulated in the hyper positive videos. So that's another aspect of it is not giving tips on individual stocks and things like that. I can cover information and things along those lines. And that gets messy as well because, again, with the registration, you have to be very careful with the types of coverage you have. But that's another aspect there. But those are kind of the two biggest ones, more of a less legally required one. But I try my best to there's always the incentive, but I really don't want to go down the road of clickbait. And I've only ever had flames in my thumbnail as a as a joke.
You're a better man than most of us, Richard.
Well, I get it. I know that the flames come with the premium. I understand it. And you know, I've spoken with creators, and they're like, Richard, like, you don't understand the effect that approach has. And so I understand that aspect of it. But at the end of the day, like, for my own channel, and this is, again, this is not to put my channel above others, or this is what works for me. I have to keep in mind that I have clients who watch some of my videos. So that's really guided a lot of my action with the channel, where, you know, those conflicts of interest for sensationalizing stuff and saying this is the end of the US stock market as we know it, or this is the next Great Depression 2.0 is coming next week. Like those type of videos, I have to keep in mind that if I were to go down that route, there's going to be a client who's going to be calling me up and saying, Richard, like, so, like, should I sell everything? Like, what are you telling me? So that's been a very good guiding principle to keep in mind, because, you know, at the end of the day, I have to keep in mind that as much as I do my best to be honest and transparent with stuff, I do have to keep in mind that there is that business side of it where I have to be careful, and it's in the client's interest to try to take that more objective route, to cover important details, but to avoid doing so in a way that would lead to those instincts of fear or even greed, on the extent which, you know, no one needs to. Well, that's not true. Those who are well read in finances know that those are the biggest sort of crutches of investors, or rather the biggest headwinds that investors face are the general fear and greed that come with events. So that's always really helped the channel in terms of guiding it with the content it posts.
And I guess the last thing, I kind of just wanted to round out our chat by saying, let's say, you know, creators are still nefarious, nothing changes, there's no added disclosures. From the viewer's side, what are some tips that you could recommend viewers consider before watching any sort of finance content? What do you think? What are some warnings that they should hear going into the space?
Yeah, so I think the biggest warning is when it comes to, again, the motivations and the qualifications of the information you're coming across. It's like with anything, you know, like when it comes to the internet, you have to be so critical of what you see, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt. So I'll actually highlight that there were 3 points in the CFA report, the CFA Institute's report, that they suggested be part of an educator's plan for tackling the situation. So they were recommending that schools and different institutions try to instill these practices onto their students. But the 3 points were things to consider when watching content. The first is motivations. So what are the motivations of the creator? Are they financially incentivized, or do they receive financial compensation? What is the nature of that financial compensation? Because that will help you understand some of the conflicts of interest that exist. And that includes as well, I think a big part with that is whether a creator owns a given stock that they're talking about. You know, it's very easy to talk positively about a position when you stand to benefit from other people buying it. So that's one aspect, is motivations. The second aspect is qualifications. And that's not, again, to gatekeep against, say, amateur content. But, you know, if someone goes online and says, you should buy these stocks, you should know if they're qualified to be making those suggestions, and what those qualifications are. And if they're easy to, another point that they highlight is if it's easy to verify. So if someone says, well, especially when it comes to scams and things like that, when someone says, well, I'm an ex-Wall Street hedge fund manager, and now I'm selling you this Bitcoin trading course or Bitcoin trading Discord group or whatever it is, are the qualifications easy to verify? Because it's very easy to say you're whatever online. So that's the second aspect. Motivations, qualifications. And the third is consistency, which just refers to the idea of, is the information consistent across different sources, which is basically just fact checking the details you come across, and doing a quick Google search to see, well, hey, if this person says this is going to happen, or this is a fact about investing, can I find another source that says this tall claim or whatever have you? And I think none of those individually allow you to judge the merit of a video. And I think, you know, like when it comes to qualifications, I always like to highlight that amateur piece where just because someone isn't a registered advisor, or even if they're an amateur, it's not to say there's not value in that video being posted, but all these things considered together will give you the context you need to evaluate the video you're watching, which I think is the important part. If you're going to put the onus on viewers to evaluate the information they're coming across, you need to equip them with the right tools. And I think those are 3 great approaches for that.
A good place to finish. Richard, thanks very much for coming on and having a chat today. Of course, this whole me reaching out to Richard is a result of me watching his video, What to Do with Finfluencers, from a couple of weeks ago. So I would definitely recommend you guys go and check out that video. Subscribe to his channel as well, because as I've said multiple times, he does a very good job at covering the biggest news in the markets in a very fair and balanced way. But definitely that video on Finfluencers, it's like half an hour long. That must have taken you forever to make, dude.
Yeah, a bit longer than usual. Yeah.
But it's a great piece, and it's what prompted me and sparked this conversation today. So thanks very much, Richard, for coming on. Really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Brandon, and thanks for having me on. It was great chatting.
Cheers, man. So there you go, guys. That is my chat with Richard Coffin from The Plain Bagel. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hamish, what do you think on Finfluencers? We've heard my opinion, Richard's opinion. There's a lot of, I guess there's both positives and negatives with Finfluencers. Do you kind of have a take? Do you reckon the world would be better without us?
No, I don't think so. I think you can't underestimate the accessibility, the value in accessibility for financial education and just even financial entertainment, getting people involved in the finance space.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because it is finance, it tends to attract bad actors as well. So you kind of have to deal with this mixed bag of good things and bad, good things and bad things that come from it. But to take what we have now or go back to a period where essentially if you wanted to educate yourself financially, you either did a business degree or you go pay for a very expensive financial advisor, even though maybe you just want to understand the basics. I think what we've got now is certainly better, as long as we can put the guardrails up in the correct way and filter out some of the garbage.
Yep. There you go. We're all in agreement. Myself, Richard, and Hamish, all in agreement.
Shocker.
All right, guys. Well, shocker. Well, with that said, guys, that will do us for this episode of the Young Investors Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it, something a little bit different. If this is something that you enjoyed or you want us to do more, seek out guests and get some guests back on, definitely let us know. We can organize that as well. Any feedback is appreciated. And just once again, thank you to Richard for giving us his time. He's a very busy guy. He's got 2 kids. He works full time as a portfolio manager, and he makes YouTube videos, and somehow he finds time to also do stuff like podcasts. So very big thanks to Richard for coming on and having a chat. But with that said, guys, we will get out of here. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.
See you guys.